Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That was very much anticipated there, wasn't it? You knew I was coming. My name's Graham Miller. I'm Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of Surrey and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome you all here on a fairly cold Thursday, where are we? Wednesday evening in November. Lovely, of course, to see so many of you here in person, and we have people listening online. So hopefully there'll be more of you listening in person than online. That'll be a nice sign of things to come for the future. Welcome everybody to the Surrey Hills Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Symposium. If I can just a moment of housekeeping to start. We have fire exits, this is where I do my best cabin crew impression. Fire exits that way and that way. We are not expecting a fire drill this evening, so if the alarm goes off, probably take it seriously, and you need to come down to the front and through the doors this way. So at last year's symposium, we focused on making space for nature. And this year we look forward to another evening of inspiration as we address this year's theme, which is our Climate and Biodiversity Emergency, both locally and globally. So in recent weeks, the world has obviously been focused on the pivotal COP26 UN Conference on Climate Change up in Glasgow. The culmination of that hugely significant event precedes the COP15 Biodiversity Conference, which will reconvene in Kunming in southern China next spring to plot their 10-year framework to reverse nature loss. So it's clear that the protection of the world's dwindling supply of natural capital will remain scientific, economically, and perhaps most importantly, morally imperatives that will continue to command attention and resources moving forward. At Surrey, we're taking steps to better understand and ultimately to mitigate climate and biodiversity related risks. And we're proud to play our role in contributing to nature conservation and the well-being of Surrey and its citizens. As a university, we've committed to net carbon zero by 2030, and I'm very proud to lead the university's sustainability initiatives here. So this ambition to achieve net carbon zero by 2030 comes through demand reduction. We've got to use less energy, persuade our students to turn down their heating, to be more energy conserving in their behaviour. We will generate on-site renewable energy for heat and power, and we'll do that through a range of different ways. We'll generate off-site renewable energy through participating in joint power purchase agreements. And we will unavoidably have to have offsets, but with a desire to look to invest in those offset schemes that are beneficial to our local populations as well. We recognise that that's an ambitious target, but we're determined to take that strong ambition. We were the second university in the country to commit to that degree of target, so we're very proud of that ambition, and we're locked into, and the more presentations I give like this, where I state that ambition, the more it will hold the university's feet to the fire. So forgive me for emphasising it. Beyond carbon, though, there's lots that we will do at the university. We have recently sunk a borehole on campus that's a 132-metre deep borehole, means to abstract potable drinking water. That project now provides us with over 80% of our annual water consumption of this campus through that borehole, and allows us to extract around 1 million litres of water per day. We've also therefore installed water refill sites throughout campus. So far we calculate that that's taken 70,000 plastic bottles out of landfill. We've developed a biodiversity action plan that's led to a silver accreditation, and we are now a hedgehog-friendly campus. How good is that? And we have on-site beehives as well. In the teaching side of things, we will be integrating sustainability into every program. So every student studying every program, whether it's maths or music on campus, will learn about sustainability as part of their curriculum. This is our commitment to be producing sustainably literate graduates, so that regardless of what career you go into, When you're buying a house, when you're buying a car, when you're buying a holiday, you know what questions to ask and you know what answers make sense to receive. And then through our research and innovation, we will continue to pursue our focus on sustainability as a subject, and recently resulted in us being ranked as one of the top 100 universities in the world by the Times Higher Education rankings for our impact against the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For this evening, we have an excellent lineup for you. We are truly honoured to have Tony Juniper here with you as our keynote speaker. Tony's an author, broadcaster, chair of Natural England. Tony's one of our country's leading sustainability advisors, but many of you will know him as a high-profile environmental campaigner. Over 20 years ago, as a leading voice at Friends of the Earth, Tony said we need to look at the bigger picture when it comes to climate change. And he said that we have to change everything in order to sustain the planet. We look forward to hearing from Tony shortly. After our keynote address will be followed by presentations from today's panel. We have Marisa Heath, who's Surrey Cabinet Member for the Environment on our county's Climate Change Action Plan. We have Heather Ackroyd, who's one half of the internationally acclaimed Partnership of Artists, Ackroyd and Harvey. Daro Montag, who is Associate Professor of Art and Environment at Falmouth University. We have the young environmental activist. This is what it says here, that's a way to introduce you, James. James Miller speaking this evening. And then we have closing remarks from Heather Kerswell, who is the chair of the Surrey Hills AONB board. All of this will be chaired by our very own Professor Jim Al-Khalili, who is a quantum physicist, author, broadcaster. Jim holds the University of Surrey Distinguished Chair, a personal chair in physics since 2005, and the University Chair in Public Engagement and Science. We will allocate some time at the end for questions, so I hope you get ready with some questions through the evening. And as I hand over to our keynote speaker, who I'm hoping is going to appear behind me, otherwise I'm just going to have to keep ad-libbing for a bit. But I would like to express our huge and heartfelt gratitude to Surrey Hills. Hopefully that's not him saying, no, he's not here. To Surrey Hills AONB, Surrey County Council, all our local partners who help us accelerate ideas into practice and create a really formidable influence that advances on our sustainable journey. So with that, I'm hoping I can hand to Tony and that the tech people in the background can produce Tony. Tony, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Fantastic.
Yes,
we can hear you, Tony.
This is it's a bit like the Today programme, isn't it, really? People disappearing and coming and going.
You're our outside broadcast, and you've saved me having to do the weather report then. So, Tony, over to you.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed, Graham, for the introduction and indeed for the invitation to join your event this evening. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to come along and say a few words. My only regret is not being there in person. I had hoped to come to Surrey today, but I had to be in a different part of the country, and I'm now speaking to you from the bottom of my garden in Cambridge. But at least we have a connection, and hopefully I can share a few thoughts of some interest to this evening's discussion. And the topic this evening, of course, could not be more important or more timely, a consideration of the twin crises that we now face in terms of ecological change on our planet, the twin crises of climate change and the decline of nature. And they are advisedly described as twin crises because they are very closely related to one another and they have the same origin. And that origin, of course, is the way in which human societies have evolved and their culture and their economies and the level of demand that has come from that. And they are related in the extent to which one cannot be solved without action on the other. And if we do wish to retain a stable climatic envelope in which human development can continue indefinitely into the future, we have to conserve the natural world. There is no plausible pathway to a 1.5 or 2 degree world which doesn't involve halting destruction of the natural environment and indeed beginning in earnest with its recovery to catch carbon from the atmosphere, and where there's going to be inevitable climate change in any event, to help us adapt to the consequences. And similarly, if we are going to avoid the mass extinction of animals and plants and continuing degradation of ecosystem services that is now gathering such terrifying pace on planet Earth, we're going to have to limit climate change very quickly indeed. So these two trends, mass extinction of animals and plants and ecosystem degradation on the one side, and the rise in average global temperature on the other, they have to be dealt with together. And that's going to require an integrated approach whereby we can see all of the different pieces in play at once and make intelligent choices which are going to be able to deal with these two challenges at the same time. And of course, at the same time, provide for human water and food security, economic development, and sustaining human welfare. And all of that actually became a matter of consensus discussion at COP26 in Glasgow just a couple of weeks ago. And I've been attending those discussions going back to Rio in 1992 and watching the discussion unfolding. And one of the heartening things about COP26 was the extent to which now the world can see the convergence between these two agendas. And Graham mentioned the meeting of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which will take place in China next year, where we will have the opportunity to pick up the baton from the climate talks at COP26 and to find corresponding and complementary agendas which we can take into the biodiversity discussion. So finally, the world has woken up to this. And, you know, it is literally 30 years ago when the world met in Rio de Janeiro for the Earth Summit, and these issues were registered then. It's taken us 3 decades to reach this point. It's an awfully long time, but finally the penny does seem to have dropped. And I've been involved with these questions long enough now to see the difference that's taking place at the moment. These questions really are on the political agenda, at least in many countries. And there is now an appreciation of the need to move into a different phase of actually dealing with them. And the reason for that, I think, one of the main reasons why we've moved into this new phase of actually seeing the need to take some serious action, is because we've understood the implications of all of this. And back at Rio, and indeed until quite recently, quite a few leading political figures and many in business saw the job of halting and reversing these trends as something which was against the interests of people. And indeed, until quite recently, the environmental damage, which is now so widely documented, it was regarded by quite a few commentators as the price of progress. It's regrettable, but it's inevitable. If we're going to grow the economy, create jobs, have internationally competitive industries, then environmental damage is something we have to tolerate as part of that greater good of being able to create better, more comfortable conditions for people through expanding wealth and having an economy which could meet ever-growing human needs and a growing population at the same time. But what we've come to understand during the recent period is actually that this is a false conception, and that if we don't halt the environmental damage, actually it's the economy and society that's going to be the biggest casualty, because our economic system is a wholly owned subsidiary of nature. And the more we degrade nature, the more we undermine the foundations of economic development, and then of course with social consequences following from that. And there have been a raft of very important studies over the period that has brought us to this stage. Obviously, the Stern Review in 2006, looking at the economics of climate change. That groundbreaking review told us that the costs of dealing with climate change would be far lower than the costs of dealing with the consequences of it. And that has been a very important shaper of the discussion, reframing the conversation to tell us that action on climate change is not against the interests of people. Actually, it very much is about the pursuit of human welfare and security. And only this year, we had a comparable review led by Professor Sapatha Dasgupta, the economist working for the British Treasury, who reached very similar conclusions in relation to biodiversity, namely that it makes far more sense to invest in the conservation of the biological system, our life support system, than to pay for the consequences of not doing that, which are far more expensive. It's kind of obvious at one level, but when the economists put it so starkly, then we get into a new phase of discussion and hopefully into a phase of action. Now, when it comes to the action, we've got some pretty clear signals now coming from the scientific community, some very clear steers. In relation to climate change, if we are going to hold the temperature to between 1.5 and 2 degrees, hopefully closer to 1.5, then we're going to have to cut emissions in half by about 2030. And then we're going to have to cut them in half again by 2040 and get to net zero emissions by 2050. So this is a pretty steep curve of decline that we're going to have to get on pretty rapidly. That's globally, of course. And then when it comes to the biodiversity, it's the opposite. So as we go low carbon, we have to go high nature, and to reverse a curve of decline that's been going on now for centuries, and to get into recovery, to begin the restoration of ecosystems, to begin the restoration of the abundance of nature, and to avoid extinctions, which now in many cases look pretty inevitable unless we take really quite urgent and drastic action. So that's the job of the next 10 years, is to cut emissions of greenhouse gases in half with a trajectory to getting to zero by 2050, and to at least bottom out the curve of decline on biodiversity, and hopefully to get into a period of restoration by 2030. And these kinds of targets now are openly being debated in the global discussion, and increasingly, of course, are being reflected in what is being said at home in terms of our contribution to solving the global picture. Because actually, at the end of the day, and this is one thing I learnt during my time at Friends of the Earth and elsewhere, is that all of these global challenges, they're only ever going to be resolved if individual countries take action on them. And indeed, those individual countries are going to have to deliver that action through a series of steps which take place in communities, in localities, in places like Surrey, where if we can turn the curve there, and at the same time as doing it in Berkshire, Kent, Cornwall, Northumberland, and everywhere else, then the entire country begins to change direction. And if we can be doing that in France, in Germany, in China, in Russia, then we have an opportunity to avoid this period of impending ecological catastrophe, which is on the horizon, and instead to rebuild ecological integrity and resilience, to limit climate change to within manageable proportions, and to do that in ways which are going to lead to a much brighter future for humankind through the conception of a sustainable economy. And when you look at England's particular contribution to these global challenges, I think it is actually pretty considerable in terms of what we can offer. Because if you think about it for a second, and the trends that are shaping the modern world, the massive scale combustion of fossil fuels to drive economic growth, the spread of industrial agriculture, and the process of urbanization driven by ever more consumerist economies. All of these things began in Britain during the Industrial Revolution, and indeed the agricultural revolution that accompanied it. So could England be the place where we conceive the ecological revolution, which is going to be the antidote to those climate and nature emergencies? Well, I think the answer is yes, we could do that if we wanted. We have the know-how, we have the popular demand for action, we have the technologies and the policies and tools to be able to do this. And indeed, we now have a whole raft of laws and commitments and targets coming from government over the last few years that put us in a very different position compared to even in 2015, 16 and 17. A 25-year environment plan, a net zero carbon target for 2050 with a series of carbon budgets leading to that point. We have an Environment Act that was passed only 2 weeks ago. And we have new agricultural policies and a whole range of tools and targets, including to have 30% of the country protected by 2030, which can get us on a road towards that 2030 waypoint with a view to making a very big and significant change by 2050. So this is the position we find ourselves in, and then what does that look like in terms of the ways in which we now respond in practice? Well, the climate side, people pay attention to the news and you can see what's going on there with the rapid rise of renewable electricity, discussions about sustainable heat, transport revolution coming with electrification of transportation. And then on the nature side, which is where my work these days is much closer at Natural England, the idea of a nature recovery network spanning the length and breadth of the country to bring back missing habitats, to restore areas of ecological importance, to bring back animals and plants that have disappeared, to be literally rebuilding the fabric of the natural environment in this country, and to be doing that, of course, in the context of the existing protected areas network, which of course includes the Surrey Hills National Landscape Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, the national parks, the wider AONB network, the national nature reserves, the sites of special scientific interest, the local nature reserves, to be using all of those new policies, the agricultural policy, the biodiversity net gain, and crucially, the idea of local nature recovery networks to create that bottom-up framework where we can bring landowners, local government, the higher education sector, alongside the NGOs, the house builders, the water companies, to bring everybody into the conversation through the framework of the local nature recovery strategies, to be pulling in all of those tools, all of that enthusiasm, all of that ability to make a difference into a single plan that can start to deliver on all of those things that we know we benefit from when we have healthy natural systems. Carbon being drawn out of the atmosphere into trees and into soils. And as a result of the soils recovering their health, then the rivers running more cleanly. And indeed, the wetlands, which will help to purify water, also recharging the aquifer, which will help to top up Graham's borehole so that water can flow through the taps into the university. And then, of course, those incredible health and well-being benefits that we know so well personally now after this COVID disaster, where we've been subject to this incredible set of restrictions, but we have been able to go outside into the natural environment, and everybody's seen the benefit of that. And then, of course, if we do all of these things, then we see a resurgence of our wildlife as those habitats and ecological services begin to recover. So this is the point that we've reached, ladies and gentlemen. We have the acknowledgement of an emergency, and indeed two of them, which are very closely related. We have an emerging global consensus that we need to act, many tensions and disagreements about who needs to do what by when, but the breakthrough has occurred in terms of the need for action now being acknowledged and people looking to see what they can do. And then in terms of what will actually do the job in the end, it's going to be leadership by individual nation states, as we showed in this country in 2008 with the adoption of the Climate Change Act, the first in the world. That led people to see that we were serious. Others have copied it. And I'm confident that now, as we move into this period of nature recovery, people are going to copy that too, as they copied what we did in the Industrial Revolution. So our opportunity for leadership is absolutely huge. This is the moment for it. And we have this incredibly rich toolkit that has now been passed through parliamentary acts of new legislation, new policies, new tools. There's more money for environmental activities over the last period, and hopefully we'll see more again into the next few years. And if you put all of that together with the willingness of the people to come together to act, then I think we could really be seeing something very special over this coming decade. And I can't emphasize strongly enough how this will be a bottom-up enterprise as much as it will be a top-down one. And so it's wonderful that you're having this conversation this evening in the context of Surrey, because it's going to be at county level that those local nature recovery strategies will be conceived. And the more energy we can unleash at that county level, the further we will get. So I will pause there, and very happy to join in with the conversation later on. Very pleased now to be handing over to Professor Jim Al-Khalili, who's going to introduce the next stages of the discussion and lead us into the debate, which couldn't be more timely and which I'm sure is going to be most interesting and most informative. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Thank you very much, Tony. I can't think of anyone better than you to offer these inspiring words. A call to arms, really, on the climate emergency, sustainability, biodiversity. So we move on to the debate part of this evening. You can see behind me on the screen here, Slido. I don't know how many of you have used Slido, but if you use your mobile phones, you connect to that website and you enter the code, you can then ask questions of the panelists. They will come up on the screen, and I will ask them of the panelists as they come up. You can be anonymous, or you can add your name if you like. So while that's happening, and I think I advise you not to leave your coming up with your questions till the very end. If you think of them as one of the panelists, they're going to give short presentations just to lay out their stall, and so once they've spoken or while they're speaking, you can be typing your question, and we will come to them in the end when I invite the panelists all back up to the front together. So thanks. So I'm Jim Al-Khalili. I've been introduced already. I'm local here. I've been at the University of Surrey for forever and a day. I was a student here in the 80s, and I think a couple of years escaping after my PhD. I then came back again. So although I live in Portsmouth, I know the university, I know Surrey and Guildford very well indeed. Right, so before the debate starts, I mentioned I'm going to invite each of our four panelists. We have four panelists all going to say a few words, and I'll invite them in turn. So first, I'm delighted to welcome Marisa Heath, who is Cabinet Member for the Environment at Surrey County Council, and of course a member of Surrey Hills AONB Board. And Marisa is going to tell us a little bit about the ambitions of the Surrey Climate Change Action Plan. Marisa, over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this symposium. Tony's words just now about local were incredibly important, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get change across the county of Surrey, and hopefully that will inspire and go wider. But of course, we have to look at what we're doing in our own backyards. And so we delivered last month, October, our Surrey Climate Change Delivery Plan. And that sets out what we're going to do between 21 and 25 in order to reduce our carbon emissions. And we haven't limited it just to the county council. What we've said is we as an authority will get to net zero by 2030. But as a county, we're going to get to net zero by 2050. And we as an authority won't limit ourselves to just the things under our control. We will also look at scope 3, and we will come and work with residents groups, and try to help with behaviour change. This is slightly different to what councils normally do, but I think we've got to show leadership in this area, and we're absolutely determined to play our role in this and to make a real change. I'm not going to go into massive detail on the plan. It's long. You can have a look at it online, and you can see all the things we're going to do, the things that Tony mentioned. We're looking at changing energy sources. We're looking at electric vehicle infrastructure, green buses, at changing our refuge vehicles, all sorts of different things going across the whole of the county, working with our schools and our education facilities as well. What I'm actually going to speak about more broadly is the motivation and inspiration behind Surrey County Council, why we're doing this, and with a particular focus on Surrey's best asset, which is its countryside. And of course, the AONB is a key part of that. That, for me, is the real inspiration between what drives us all and what drives the arts and sciences in Surrey. Now, just a tiny bit about me. There's a lot of people involved in politics who are what we call career politicians. I'm not one of them. I've been a councillor since I was at university, so over 18 years ago, and I've not really sought to become an MP or climb that slippery ladder. Quite happy being a backbencher. Backbenchers have a lot to do. They answer to their residents, and that's their foremost job. But when the leader of Surrey County Council offered me the post of Cabinet Member for Environment, with climate change sitting in the centre of it, I couldn't refuse it. I consider it a really great honour to be part of this work, including that climate change plan that I've just mentioned. And the reason for that is because I think we've got a tremendous opportunity within Surrey to really be a leader and to make a huge shift in the way we live and to realign our focus from money and convenience to the natural environment around us. And I admit, We're probably a bit late in doing this. We at Surrey declared an emergency in 2019, and we've spent the last year and a half or so pulling together the data and important information that ensures we can be measurable in our targets and transparent and show you what we're doing. The commitments from international governments, in my mind, are still nowhere near good enough, and I think the task ahead of us is absolutely immense. But what I can confirm is we are on a new course. We've changed our attitude, we've changed our priorities, and we've changed our perceptions. And I believe and hope that when we look at the 2020s in the future, it will see it as a landmark decade in human history as we go towards 2030 to make significant dents in the carbon emissions. I think it will be marked as a period when we accepted our time on this planet as a species is most certainly not infinite, and it's not a given, and we've got to change the way we live and work. In my mind, I think it will go down as being known as the real green revolution, not the one which the term's often referred to, which is agricultural development in the 1950s. Actually, looking at it, that probably wasn't too green in the long term if we really think about it, although of course it did a lot for world hunger. I think at the county, we see the majority of our elected members, and there's a few in this audience today, who are now really connected to delivering climate change, even those who've actually been quite sceptical up until now. And I think that does extend to national government too, although I would say government needs to come up with more delivery mechanisms much faster, and we're going to need them if we're going to meet the targets we've set as a local authority. But that's probably another conversation, and feel free to ask questions on that later. We've got to the place we are now by the mixture of scientists saying it for some time, the Extinction Rebellion activism, particularly in 2019, and probably a fair bit can be attributed to a single person, Richard Attenborough, who brought it into people's homes that the things that we are seeing, that all that beauty, we are destroying. So as a council, we haven't had a dictated mandate from central government to go to net zero, but we have fully recognised and accepted we're going to step up and play a significant role in this work. And you know what? I think it's absolutely right that we do. We as a council have a tremendous responsibility on us to look after children in care, to safeguard the vulnerable, to provide for our communities, and to build the infrastructure needed for economic prosperity. And this all means hard choices every day on how we spend your money, taxpayers' money. But ultimately, all of this becomes less important in the face of, say, a worldwide food shortage, owing to weather patterns that means crops cannot be grown, animals cannot be fed, and the basics we expect, such as bread and cereals, cannot be produced. All of our residents, old, young, those in the middle, we all need food, air, and water to survive. And these are all things that are impacted by climate change. And these threats are no longer remote. We've seen examples of this across our own county, with the increase in flooding and the awful fires across Chobham Common last year. And another reason why Surrey County Council needs to be a leader on protecting the environment is the fact we are responsible for huge swathes of countryside and rural land that has got to be at the very centre of our new way of living. And I expect in this audience today, I'm speaking to those who know this too well, but how many of you see the countryside as your sanctuary, at the place you go for the best therapy for any depression, anxiety or stress? I know for me, my hardest times have been helped by an hour or so in the countryside, Surrey's countryside, with my dog. And the best times of that have been when I've spotted something, a stag, an owl, an adder, a rare bird. This is the wildlife that we take for granted here. But did you know there are 972 species in numbers in decline in Surrey alone, and more frightening, 626 that are now extinct across our county? That to me is stark and horrifying, and I think it's a key part of what inspires me to do this work personally. Those creatures and insects are being wiped out by our actions, and that impacts the wider elements of biodiversity that Tony just spoke about, the same biodiversity that keeps our ecosystems functioning and therefore keeps us living. So for Surrey, in its strategic position near London, next to Heathrow, near Gatwick, with major motorways, and being a significant economic player, we're second after London in contributions to the Treasury, biodiversity has had a big hit. And so we now have to figure out every possible way to bring that biodiversity back to Surrey. And I think this is an issue that we at Surrey see as a priority, and one that is clear and understandable to just about all of our residents, and it plays a large part in our plan. And I think just finally, through our Surrey countryside, that's where we will inspire the wider action in relation to climate change. We need to use the countryside, the wildlife, the farmland, the aim that we've got to plant 1.2 million trees as the best way of bringing people in to understand the importance of the environment and why they've got to play a part in protecting it. And where we can't get people into the countryside, we need to bring it to them. Trees, shrubs, flowers in our urban areas too, wild meadows on verges where it's safe to do so, bee hotels and bird boxes in the smallest gardens, information in our schools, and out through the groups which work on youth justice, family support, children with educational needs. Getting climate change integrated into all levels of our society is where I see the council and my role as foremost sitting. I'm not an expert on climate change by any stretch, especially compared to many of the people in this room and the others who will be speaking. But what I do understand is communities, and I understand policy, and I hope I, with the team at Surrey, can play a real role in the change that is going to happen. It has to happen. So I'll just end now by saying we've got a short video, some of you may have seen it earlier in the day, that just covers our work specifically on climate change within our plan. And again, I'd say thank you for allowing me to speak on this panel this evening. Thank you.
We can no longer think of climate change as a problem for the future. It's already affecting the lives of millions of people across the globe, including those that live and work in Surrey. In recent years, we've seen an increase in devastating floods and wildfires across Surrey and the rest of the world. Through collective climate action, we want to make Surrey a cleaner, greener, healthier place with vibrant communities and a thriving economy.
In July 2019, Surrey County Council declared a climate change emergency. In April 2020, we set out our climate change strategy, a science-led piece of work which sets out our commitment to going carbon neutral as an organisation by 2030 and as a county by 2050. We have now published our first 5-year plan setting out how we're going to achieve this. In Surrey, 41% of our emissions are from transport. That's higher than the average in the southeast of England. And of this, 68% is private vehicles. We will be encouraging more residents and businesses to leave their cars at home and choose to walk or cycle or take public transport. This will help to reduce harmful emissions that contribute towards global warming and affect the health of people and wildlife. We're looking to support this change through more cycle lanes, better bus provision, and when people do still need to use their car, we're supporting the switch to electric with the installing of electric charging vehicle points across Surrey. 28% of Surrey's emissions come from the gas, heating oil and electricity used to light and heat our homes. We're asking residents to make improvements by draft-proofing, switching to low-carbon systems and installing solar panels in their homes. As well as helping the environment, these changes can help reduce bills. Of course, we also need to get our own house in order. We're changing our fleet of vehicles to be electric, retrofitting our buildings and changing the way we work to reduce our carbon consumption as a county. We know that the green economy is essential to achieving our aims. We are supporting businesses through our grant funding programme Locase and through our Green Skills Academy.
We also need to focus on our land and green spaces and make sure that we use them to provide that climate resilience that we are looking for. It's really important that we have effective land management to not only store carbon for mitigation purposes, but also adaptation in the form of reducing flooding, for example, and increasing biodiversity as well. Growing food locally and sustainably is an important part of reducing our carbon footprint. Improving habitats will allow our wildlife to thrive. We are all part of one ecosystem.
With my work within the community, I hear from different people and I hear concerns about, well, what's the point of doing anything because the bigger companies are not doing enough, the larger countries are not doing enough to reduce carbon emissions. And what I would say is that every little counts. We can work with Surrey County Council to tackle climate change through joining a community group, especially in Surrey. There's so many climate hubs that I've set up. Over the pandemic, we were really good. We got involved in street groups, we supported each other. Why not take that to the next step now forward and address the climate agenda? A lot of the emitters are out of the control of the council, so we really need to work on this together. We hear the words climate emergency, but unfortunately that's not reflected in our action. I've got family, we all got family, we've got loved ones, and I just feel that we need to think about their future and what sort of conditions they're going to be living in.
We're working together
to tackle the
Climate
emergency.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you again, Heather, for your words. Thank you. Okay, so next up is Heather Ackroyd, who, along with Dan Harvey, forms Ackroyd Harvey, who are a Surrey base yet with a worldwide reputation for their pioneering work in science, art, and environmental activism. Heather.
Good evening. An ecological revolution gets my vote. And although I would say in my heart, I think what we're facing, the climate and biodiversity emergency, is in truth beyond party politics. There is no doubt, we all know, that we are in a dire state. There is no doubt are the words that were used for the launch of Culture Declares Emergency in April 2019. Across arts and activists came together in a procession led by a horse and a rider in a garment of living grass, declaring a climate and ecological emergency. Started at Somerset House, moved across Waterloo Bridge, down to the South Bank Centre, the National Theatre, Tate Modern, the Globe, all the cultural heritage gems, declaring the emergency with an invitation, join us. We were born out of Extinction Rebellion. We were born out of Fridays for the Future. We were born out of Australian councils declaring emergency. We were born out of resistance to oppression of Indigenous people and racial inequality. We're now over 2,000 artists from the broad sector of the arts, dancers, musicians, visual artists, theatre makers. We have notable institutions, Tate, Somerset House, the British film industry, Serpentine Gallery are about to declare, notables, Anthony Gormley, Cornelia Parker, and a myriad of many artists who you may not know but have been working for the last few decades to put the climate crisis into the center of our cultural landscape. Our values are telling the truth about the crisis, taking action, activists, and seeking justice, climate justice. COP26, 1.5, dead in the water, fragile, tenuous, 2.5 degrees centigrade. Can we even begin to imagine what that means? In reality, if the nations don't stick to the pledges, we could be looking at 3 degrees centigrade by the end of this century. Do we understand what that means? 1990, Dan and I started to work together. So this was the year that the YBA movement, the Young British Artists, was starting to come into ascendancy. The Unholy Trinity, Damien Hirst, White Cube, Charles Saatchi, and BP became a sponsor in Tate Modern. Dan and I were working with seeds, photosynthesis, chlorophyll, mold and mud, crystals, fascinated by processes of inorganic and organic growth. But chlorophyll, making these biochemical living photographs, really caught our imagination. And as we delved into the magic of chlorophyll and photosynthesis, we became increasingly aware of the instability of our climate. And we understood the role that ancient plant matters had, ancient carbon within our coal, our oil, our fossil fuels, and how they were ripping apart any sense of stability that we felt we had license to. It struck us deeply, and deeply we recognized that we had to stand up and take some degree of charge and start to challenge the sanitization of fossil fuels, seeking reputation mitigation within the cultural sector. And this is happening. I want now to pay tribute to activist campaign groups, Liberate Tate, BP, not BP, Culture Unstained. Please check out their websites, Laboratory of Insurrectory Imagination. They have done incredibly hard work for years and years and years. And you know what? There are wins. We can actually celebrate the wins. Tate and BP separated. Last year, 2020, the South Bank Centre, the National Theatre, they severed their ties with Shell. And this is hard activist work, but it matters. We have to separate. We have to not accept the license of this toxic industry that has caused so much damage for a long, long time. I'll tell you about this more in the panel. So I want now to also mention Writers Rebel. Writers Rebel is the literary wing of Extinction Rebellion, and they approached Dan and I earlier this year and asked us whether or not we would go into collaboration with an extraordinary man, the writer, poet, and activist, Ben Aykroyd. How could we not? We did a piece of work called On the Shore. It's a work in 2 acts. There's a short film, but we won't show that now, of Act 1, inside Tate Turbine Hall, where we grew a 16-meter living seedling grass banner with Ben's words, "Can't you hear the future weeping? Our love must save the world." And we'll now show you Act 2. Thank you.
This earth that we love is in grave danger because of us. They say that the earth has, I don't know, maybe only 50 years of topsoil left. They say, I don't know, maybe we've only got 2 decades of fishes in the sea. Can you hear the future weeping? In the past, we have used fear. We have thrown facts at people. It seems to be asking too much for people to alter how they live so that life on this planet can survive. Fear doesn't work. Guilt doesn't work. So I thought maybe love might work. We are at a terminal point. It's either extinction or we become a newer, more efficient, more loving species. Nothing ordinary can achieve that. Only love can do it. Our love must save the world, for love is the last power that stands between us and extinction.
As an economist once said, there is only one true economy on our planet, and that is photosynthesis. And photosynthesis takes light and it converts it to life, and it nourishes us all.
I'm a huge believer in the power of art. Whilst we are here right now, art is such a threat that the Met Police have raided the Extinction Rebellion art factory. At its very essence, for me, art is the soul of humanity.
We are Writers Rebel, Extinction Rebellion's very own literary wing. Our mission is to put literature in the service of humankind's greatest challenge, ensuring the safe continuation of ecological life on this planet in all its astonishing diversity.
I think for me, we look at the planet and we think of the planet as almost inanimate, as solid and fixed, but it's not, it's all in motion. Whether it's the bacteria in the soil, the worms moving the soil, we are part of nature and we need to learn to love that.
This little fragment of a song came from Mirabella. If you want the pure voice, you have it, so just enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heather and Dan, of course. And Heather and Marisa are going to be joining us for the debate later. So please, if you have questions, start putting them into Slido now. Okay, so next up we have Daro Montag, who's an Associate Professor of Arts and Environment at University College Falmouth, who works with living organisms and natural processes. Daro, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you. Yeah, we used to be University College Falmouth. We've now graduated. We are now Falmouth University. We've grown up. Back, oh, I don't know how many, 2004, I started a research group called Research into Art, Nature and Environment. And these were the sorts of issues we looked at. And we had artists, we had conferences, but it's great that it's actually happening. But I don't always feel that optimistic. So I just wondered, how many people here feel optimistic? Can you put up your hand if you feel optimistic? Okay, for the people who may be online and can't see that, that's about 1/10 of the people here. How many people feel pessimistic? Oh, someone's both, that's great. I'm sorry to say that that the majority here do feel pessimistic, and I think that's very common. You know, we are in the shit. Let's make no mistake about it. We should have dealt with this years ago. We never did. It's great that Surrey's doing so much good work. I'm pleased to hear it. I'm pleased that the government is at last waking up. Net zero by 2050, is that achievable? Well, what is net zero? What does it mean? You know, is it a meaningful target? I'll talk about this in a minute. But I just wanted to reflect on something that my students, I do with my students, and that is ask them questions. I have to admit that I don't know the answers, but I ask them questions. So by asking you a question, I just wanted to reflect on that moment of what do you feel about it at the minute? And the majority of you seem to feel that things are not that good. But I don't want to be a downer here. I want to give you something to think about. So what I'm going to suggest is that each and every one of you can do something. I don't know what that is, but you can do something. So my suggestion is, do what you can. Do what you can. And this is something I can do. I used to make art. I used to make art with animals. I used to make art with the living world. Richard here got me started many years ago with his scientific work. I used to collaborate with animals. I thought that was really important, and I used to listen to nature. But I think as I've sort of developed and become more and more aware of our emergency, I've started to think, what else can I do? It's all very well making art, but how can I also channel that creativity that is everywhere? So I started making charcoal. And we talk about carbon offsets. Again, what does that actually mean? Well, it turns out that there's an awful lot of carbon in the atmosphere, and we're putting it there. We're putting it there, we know, by burning the fossil fuels. But strangely, if you burn wood or any organic matter that contains carbon, you can actually put carbon back into the ground, back into the soil where it's needed. So by making charcoal and crushing it down and then burying it in the soil, we are able to extract carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back in the soil where it needs to be. I'm assuming that most of you don't know how to make carbon, and this is one way you can do it. You burn wood in a kiln and you shut down the oxygen, so it burns without oxygen. Now, if we didn't do that, it would obviously burn and carbon dioxide would leak out into the atmosphere. Most of what you see that going off at the top is actually water vapor. That smoke is water vapor. So inside there at the moment, we've got a lot of very hot wood, and it's smouldering away, and I shut it down and it continues to burn without the oxygen. And what gets left is carbon. It's the carbon that was sucked out of the atmosphere by that tree during the tree's lifetime. So the tree is helping us. It's sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, and through this process, it is made into charcoal, which is a stable form of carbon. You've all seen charcoal. If you're an artist, you draw with it. If you like a barbecue, you've probably burnt the stuff. But by taking it out of the kiln and then burying it in the ground, that carbon is stable. It stays in the ground for a very long time. It can actually help improve the structure of the soil. So as an artist, in addition to making what looks like art, I make charcoal, biochar, and this is it. So I shall stop talking there, because one or two of you may have questions about that, but hang on to that idea that do what you can. That's all we can do.
Thank you very much, Daro. Fascinating stuff. And last but not least, we have James Miller as our young environmental campaigner. James was brought up in Surrey, but is currently studying natural sciences at Cambridge, and of course is an environmental campaigner. Okay, James, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, and it's wonderful to be on such a great panel, and actually in person as well. It's been a while, I think, for all of us, probably. Do I have a clicker right here for the slides? Let's give this a go. Or am I going the wrong direction? I might be. There we go. Yes, so as I was introduced, I'm a young environmental activist. I used to introduce myself as a teenage activist, but unfortunately, like a week ago, I've had to stop doing that now. I've turned 20. But yeah, it's really difficult actually to put an age on when I first started to develop this interest in these issues. If I had to put an age to it, I would probably say around 4, which is when I started wandering around my garden and looking under logs and stones for creepy crawlies. And I think that's where my initial interest in nature started. But as I grew older, I began to become aware of the scale of the threats that wildlife faced in my home and around the world. And the fact that also, as well as threatening to erase all these beautiful creatures and places that I so wanted to see, it had profound implications on the future of our species as well. And that is when I started to make nature documentaries. For those of you who are wondering, it's not the real thing, it's a cardboard cutout that scared the living daylights out of me one morning when it was placed outside my room at university. But yes, I started making films about local wildlife in and around my house and in the local area, in the hope of inspiring more people my age especially to engage with local wildlife and to step up to protect it. And that's how I really got involved in activism. That's how I started. And alongside this filmmaking and presenting, I also began to become a lot more involved in political advocacy and campaigning as well. And that's something I've continued doing right up until the current day. And actually, I think for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to take you through just a couple of the projects I've been involved in a little more recently, very briefly. And the first of those is actually through an organization, a fantastic youth-led organization that I'm involved in called Reserve at the Youth Land Trust. And what we're doing is we're creating the world's first entirely youth-funded nature reserves around the world. We started with an area in Ecuador in the Chocó cloud forest, which is one of the most biodiverse areas on the planet, more biodiverse per unit area than the Amazon. but it's also one of the most threatened areas in South America as well. It's under huge threat from mining, especially. So it was of crucial importance that we protected this land. And we started with a 244-acre site, which in fact we managed to protect just a few weeks ago. We announced that. And all the money used to purchase the land, to pay the forest guards, everything to do with all the on-the-ground conservation work was raised entirely by people under the age of 26, through things like sponsored marathons, cake sales, weekend jobs, the whole lot. And I think my personal biggest contribution to this project was through the Concert for Conservation that I organized last year. This actually arose when I was trying to organize a speaker evening here in Guildford. And of course, it was March of last year and COVID struck and it was cancelled. But I thought instead I could organize something online. And I knew it was much harder to hold people's attention online. People have a much shorter attention span. And so I thought perhaps instead of a speaker series, it might be more tactical as a fundraiser to use music instead. And that's what we did. We partnered with UN Biodiversity and the Rainforest Trust, and we brought in an amazing lineup of Emmy Award-winning artists, YouTube pop stars, film score composers, and we had a 2-hour-long concert on Instagram Live that reached thousands of people around the world. And in fact, it was so successful that we decided to organize another one a month later, which featured Olivia Rodrigo, who some of you may recognize. She's quite ubiquitous now, but she's also really into conservation. And between the two of those concerts, we raised more than $2,000 for conservation, all of which went into protecting that first rainforest reserve in Ecuador. And I think this goes to show as well that by bringing together popular culture and advocacy and education, we can engage whole new audiences who may have not have had this pre-existing interest in conservation. What we did, as well as the musical concerts, the musical performances themselves, was we brought in National Geographic explorers and scientists in between those performances to talk about their work and things that were close to their heart. And so it had a very strong educational aspect to it as well, which I think was really, really important. In this year, as has already been mentioned, COP26 happened just a few weeks ago in Glasgow in Scotland. And this is something that I turned my attention towards very early on in the year. And one of the major things that I did in the run-up to that summit was help to coordinate the installation of this in Glasgow. This is the Glasgow Climate Clock. It's basically a 7-story high science communication tool. It shows 2 numbers. The one on the left is our deadline, and that's counting down the time we have left until we overrun our carbon budget for 1.5 degrees. It's that critical time window in which we have to take drastic action to reduce carbon emissions. The number on the right is a little more optimistic though. That's our lifeline, and that's counting up the percentage of the world's energy generated by renewable resources. And if we can push that up towards 100% as quickly as possible, that will buy us more time on the deadline because our annual emissions will go down. We set this up in June, and it's been up there every single night in Glasgow right up until COP26. When it looked down on world leaders as they were negotiating the future of my generation and of generations to come. It's really difficult with projects like this to gauge any real idea of the impact that it's having, but we hope that it instilled in them that same sense of urgency that young people like me, and I'm sure many of you in the audience here, feel every single day. I don't really know what I'm going to do now. All my advocacy work relating to COP26 has come to an end, of course, because the summit ended a few weeks ago. I think we're now all looking towards COP27 as the next big political event happening next year. It should be, I think, even more important than COP26, because over the period of the next few months, we actually have a real opportunity to close the gap between current political ambition and where we need to be on a 1.5 degree trajectory. And this may be our last opportunity to do so. So I don't know what I'm going to do personally with my activism. I think I'm going to take a short period of break and rest and reflect and think about the work that I've done that's been most impactful, but also what I've most enjoyed, because I think one piece of advice that I was given that has been one of the most valuable pieces of advice I've ever heard is that you shouldn't necessarily just ask what the world needs, but you should ask what makes you really come alive, because what the world needs most is for all of us right now to come alive, to do what we really enjoy. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think that's where I'll finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Move over, Greta Thunberg. James, in fact, Marisa, Heather, and Daro, if you could all come up and take your seats on stage, we can got about sort of half an hour or so of the debate. I'm hoping both people here in the audience and those who are watching online have been submitting questions, because it's going to be rather awkward if I have to come up with all the questions to ask them. So hoping questions that are coming through. There is some sort of filtering going on to make sure the silly questions aren't coming through. But essentially, I think the audience votes on what they think are the most popular questions. So essentially, the questions that rise to the top are the ones that you really want me to put to the panel. Okay. And are there questions coming through now? I think. I'll have to, there we go. Okay, good. You know, when you chair seminars and talks, the chair always has to have a question up their sleeve just in case. You know? Good. Okay. So, is Tony still with us? Do we know? So this is a question for Tony.
Actually, I am still here, Jim. I was.
Okay, if the most popular. Oh, you are
I'm
here.
here.
Fantastic.
I'm still here.
Brilliant.
I was. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Tony. All right, well, I'm now going to ask him to switch back to the Slido so I can read you the question.
Okay.
Good. Okay. So, Tony, you threw out the challenge that the UK could take a lead in climate action. What would you say is needed to trigger the delivery of transformative change?
What's going to trigger the delivery? Well, the policy is lining up, and there is an increasing acceptance in the private sector, which delivers quite a lot of solutions, whether that's in the energy or the transport side, that they need to be taking the lead. I think it's really going to be the finance and the money that's going to get behind this, and shifting the capitalist system, which is the economic system that we live in at the moment, to be redeploying the capital that's going into industries and into enterprises that deliver some kind of economic return, and basically getting all of that money shifted over to zero carbon very quickly. And, you know, that is increasingly the view that you hear from politicians, from companies that are designing and building new business models, and also from the likes of the pension funds and other investors who are putting money into different things. So I think it's the delivery will come at scale, and it needs to be at scale. As was said a moment ago, we need to get to 100% renewables very quickly and to, you know, zero carbon transport. It's going to come from there being a simultaneous shift in business models, finance and policies, and, you know, it's coming.
Thank you. Yes, we do hear this a lot. We can all do our bit, but of course, in the end, it has to come about through policy change. Marisa, as someone whose job it is, responsibility is to deliver policies on climate, what would you say could be done on a more local, say, county level?
I mean, if I can start just on national level, I think nationally they need to give us the clear structures that they want things delivered. So we've got many different mechanisms within localities. You've got boroughs and districts, you've got county councils, you've got parish councils, you've then got all your residents and community groups and lots of different things. And I think earlier today someone was talking about duplication of efforts and the fact that we've got to be really clear about where we direct our resources. And I think kind of setting out that structure and how they expect it to be done and sort of saying to people, this is what you need to go and do very clearly would be really helpful in that. In regards to us at local level, I mean, obviously the key thing for us is going to be the money behind all of this in order to get that deliverability. So we've got to figure that out. What we've got to do is look at the existing money we've got and make it green as much as we can. But then we also need to look at innovative ways of getting money through investment funds, etc. But also government's got to, again, set those kind of mechanisms up and tell us how that's going to work. And this is about money as well as about being green. And we as an authority have to balance the public value and the environmental issues. And so we've got to be really clear how we do that and really transparent about how we do it in order to deliver, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, So, question from Anonymous. How is a commitment to net zero by SCC compatible with continuing investment of the Surrey Pension Fund in fossil fuel industries? Is that back to you, isn't it?
I mean, we're looking at across the board at what we do and trying to make changes on every level. As I just said, we also have a commitment to return best value to our residents and our taxpayers and things. So we're going to have more than this challenge. It's not just about pension funds. I was sitting here earlier thinking there's still government policy around planning that says things like mineral and gravel extraction. There's still big developments. They still want us to build all these homes and things like that. So we are constantly as a local authority going to face these really big challenges where we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions. Where we can, it's got to be green. Not even where we can, we have to push ourselves. And I think that everyone in this room and further will continue to push ourselves. So when it comes to Surrey Pension Fund, I haven't got my teeth into that area yet. I'm still relatively new in this role, but I know it's something we're looking at, and where we can be green is exactly what we're going to do. Of course we are. And I think the pension funds themselves will be thinking about going in that direction, and the people sitting behind who are investing whose money it is will be wanting us to do that as well.
Exactly.
So thank you. Okay, next question. Is the development of an onshore oil and gas industry in Surrey compatible with the limit on temperature rise of 1.5 degrees? It's sort of back to you. unless others want to comment on that.
It's definitely above 2 degrees in this seat. So, first of all, you'd say no, but then as I've just said, there is a policy that comes higher than us that says things have got to happen. And sometimes planning and these sorts of decisions are taken out of our hands unless we control them by the national planning policy itself that will make a decision for us anyway. So the government needs to answer that question as well. And secondly, you have to look at you've got to look at your long-term plan and how you're going to sustain the industry and the residents and the people's way of living around you. So if there are areas where you can get gas and oil in Surrey that cuts down getting it from a foreign country miles away where it's being shipped and things, you have to look at that. But I have said earlier in my speech that our priority has to be protecting our countryside. So when it comes to the countryside, I've said it, that's our priority. I'm not going to say no to anything until I see the facts and evidence behind everything. But as I've said, if it's detrimental to our net zero plan, then clearly no.
Heather, I'm going to put you on the spot. Since Dan was tutting disagreement, I mean...
Want to come say? So, you know, we have also been part of stopping Leith Hill No Drill, an area of outstanding natural beauty. This was a campaign that had run for 10 years. It can take that long to really turn and to move against. And it was a huge effort from thousands of people. Yes, there was a core, but at any one point, there were many other people who were coming in and shouldering. We ended up being very, very broad-shouldered. Now we're moving in on Horse Hill. They want to expand that 4 times. During the pandemic, when I was going, my one day or to go out or my weekly, I picked up a New Scientist magazine which said the other crisis, climate change. And it's a very respected scientist based at UEA. She's French, and I'm going to mispronounce her name, but I think her name is Corinne Lequer. And she said, the reality is to do what we need to do to hold temperatures at 1.5 degrees centigrade every year between now and 2030 has to be like January to June of the pandemic. People can't take this. People can't take this because our systems have been completely stored and stocked and held, for too long. One other little brief point. When do people think that the evidence about putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere was scientifically proven? It was actually 1856. Eunice Newton Foote, a brilliant inventor, scientist, and woman's activist. She couldn't publish, she didn't even present her paper, but she said, if we put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it will heat our planet. Fossil fuels proved, 1898. everything since then, the crisis we are in is because of political and economic impasse, and we cannot let it happen any longer.
Thank you. So a question from David. What one thing do panel members want audience members to do when they get up tomorrow morning? How can we make a difference? James, do you want to have a stab at that?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
One thing. It's difficult. There are so many things, but I think one of the most effective things that people can do actually is to start talking with each other, but also talking with the communities and the institutions, the educational establishments, your businesses, your families, whatever communities and circles that you have the possibility of influencing. Start to have conversations about what you want the future to look like and how you're going to get there. Because I think that's the way in which we can all have an impact that goes beyond our own carbon footprint. And that's the way that we need to act in order to have the most impact. So yeah, start to talk about it.
Daro, can I, similar sort of question to this. I mean, we know from certainly the pandemic and before that, the Brexit debate, that arguments get very toxic and polarized. And is there a way of getting through to people who don't get just what an emergency is coming at us? You know, how do you persuade them? We know how difficult it is just to persuade people to wear masks on a train, for goodness sakes. How do you persuade people to change the way they live their lives?
Yeah. God, if I knew that one.
I thought I'd throw you the simple question that isn't even up there.
Thank you for that. Firstly, I just want to say something else. I do want to express my sympathy for any politicians or councillors who are actually here today. You've got a really difficult job because you've got to convince people to change their lives. And people don't like doing that. And I don't like doing it. No one likes doing it. But your job, I'm afraid, is to get people to go with you, to get them to change. And it is big change. It's not just tinkering on the edges here. It's actually dismantling pretty much everything that we do. Now that doesn't sound great, but I firmly believe that actually we can move to a better and fairer society as a result of this. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be tough, but I think we can move towards a fairer society, not just for people, but for planet and all the other species that we should be sharing this place with. How do we do it? I think we are up against it. It's small changes, but small and very, very quick ones. We need to ramp it up very, very quickly. I don't think it is down to just money. I think money's important, obviously, but I think it's more down to will. And I think, you know, I work with a lot of youngish people, students. There is the will there. There is an awareness. There is a change coming. And it probably doesn't come from people like me telling people to change.
No.
Thank you.
Jim?
Oh, Tony, yes, that's you. I can hear
Yeah,
your
just come on this, yeah.
Please
Thank
do.
you.
Come
No,
back
just listening to this, and I'm reflecting on the extent to which there's a piece of this jigsaw in the environmental transformation we need to make that we don't talk about much, but which is now being touched upon there, and it's the question of culture. And the extent to which, you know, the way we do things is down to some kind of deeply ingrained kind of, you know, habits, really. And, you know, if there's one thing that we can all do, which might make a difference, it's to find things that we can do that actually show that what needs to be done to solve these environmental challenges is better than what we're doing now. You know, and the point was just made about, you know, people don't like being told what to do, especially if it's something that they don't want to do or something that they think is worse than what they're doing at the moment. And so finding things that are attractive to do, which kind of break through those cultural barriers, is actually quite a critical piece. And this is, you know, this is not climatology or ecology, this is psychology. And actually universities I think probably, you know, in their response to the nature and climate change emergency, you know, obviously there's a role for atmospheric physics and conservation biology and everything else, but a really big role for psychology and sociology in being able to disentangle this kind of set of predispositions that exist in the human mind, which make it so difficult to go from where we are to where we need to be and do something differently. And trying to understand that, I think, is really quite a critical part of the jigsaw. And the other piece, which is kind of partly linked to that, is the extent to which, you know, in the modern industrialized countries, people really just don't have a connection with the natural world anymore, not to the extent that's needed to understand the profound implications of what's going on. You know, a lot of people, they drive to work, they go to the supermarket, they pick up food from refrigerated shelves, and they go to the gym, and then they go back home again. And they're not really interacting with the cycles of life which sustain the whole system. And to that extent, are kind of really disconnected in a very literal sense. And so that disconnection and those cultural barriers, I think, are something that we need to pay much more attention to, because I think therein lies quite a lot of what we need to change.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, I've been asked to remind people, particularly those viewing online, that you need to use the QR code on the screen up there, hashtag AONB 2021, if you want to submit questions. But apparently we have lots of questions anyway, so I'm not quite sure why I need to encourage more questions to come in. Okay, so the next one, this one's for you, James. I don't know if you've seen the one at the top there. What do young people need to see from government to feel empowered to act in the climate agenda?
Fantastic, that's a great question. And I have some, I think, very concrete suggestions for this. Two of the things that I've been working on, especially at Glasgow at COP26, were areas of climate education. And that's something that I was greatly pleased to hear the Pro-Vice Chancellor mention in terms of what Surrey's doing, and also decision-making roles as well. So on the first of those, on climate education, something we're working on here in the UK as the Youth Climate Movement is persuading the government to integrate climate education more widely into the curriculum, again, covering all different subjects, because we don't just need the people that choose to study science or geography to have an active interest and understanding of this. We need the people who are going to become bankers, politicians, economists, people who are going to move into all different careers to have an understanding of the urgency of the situation and how they can play their part. So that's one aspect of it. And at COP26, we actually held an education ministers summit where we brought together education ministers and environment ministers from all over the world to make new pledges on climate education. And we got a reasonable number, not as many as we were hoping. But again, that's something we hope will be built on at COP27. The other aspect of empowerment is decision-making roles. And this was, again, something that was a really key issue at COP26, because we sent the largest youth delegation to COP26 as a youth constituency ever. We had a lot of young people round and about, but hardly any of them were in any decision-making capacity whatsoever. We were there as observers, often shut out of the room. Sometimes we were able to have meetings with negotiators and make interventions and have our voices heard, but not actually making those decisions ourselves. And something that we feel is really important, and that we actually managed to get drafted into the cover decision at Glasgow, which is the main political text that came out of the event, was for governments to commit to more meaningfully integrating young people into those decision-making processes at a local, a national, and an international level. So that's something that they've committed to in very fuzzy wording that we would like to see really meaningfully actually implemented in the coming years.
Thank you. I'm going to take the second question down because it's been sitting there for a while and it might look like I'm avoiding asking this question to you, Marisa. So would it be a good idea for Surrey County Council to follow the lead of the UK government and declare an ecological emergency as well as a climate emergency?
Yes. in my mind, we've included a lot of the biodiversity and ecological elements within our plan already. I think it is an emergency issue, actually, in my mind, so I'm not adverse to it. It's an interesting idea. We've got our officers sitting over there. We will take it away and explore it. So thank you to Helen, who posed the question. It's a useful one.
Good, thank you. Okay, so now move to the one at the top. What would a zero carbon world look like? What would our day-to-day life look like? How would we operate our lives? And what would we need to do what we would need to give up? Maybe I'll come to you, Heather, on this one.
You know, I mean, just clean air, water that's full of fishes and insects, you know, where nature is thriving, where young people and elderly people, middle-aged people, we are all beginning to thrive. Because I think we still underestimate how much that pollution is affecting our lungs, is affecting our health and our well-being. And, you know, in the pandemic, there was, and I know it was very difficult for many people in many ways, but people left their homes and they discovered just a short walk from where they lived, places they'd never ever seen before. And you know, Surrey and the woods, what we have here is something really, really potentially could be very, very special. So I think sustainability surgeries, ecological education from really young children, nursery, not a tack on, not an add-on, really embedded, you know, that it becomes part of how we are living and thinking, educating, experiencing. I think we have to dream big. And we have to believe that this is possible.
Thank you. I'm going to follow it up with another question for you, Heather, as well, because it relates to Extinction Rebellion. So although controversial, what role does direct action, such as that taken by Extinction Rebellion, have in raising public awareness and putting pressure on governments? I had an argument the other evening with a friend who said, oh, what's the point of people gluing themselves to the road? It is so and I tried to get across to him, that's the whole point of action, is that you have to inconvenience people.
You know, many things that we take for granted, a working, living wage, for women to have the vote, rights for animals, rights for children, civil rights, a weekend. Over the last decades, many of these things have been put in place by a handful, hundreds, thousands of people going that extra measure. The suffragettes, not every suffragette was in favour of the militant band who threw the stone into the Orchid House. But we remember that. That's what we remember. It has an absolute essential part to play. We are in an emergency. So many people have come together into Extinction Rebellion who are suffering, struggling, depressed, frantic, feeling there is a community. There are many people of faith in Extinction Rebellion. There are people with OBEs and CBEs and honours. There are scientists against rebellion, scientists against extinction, big business leaders, lawyers. We are not a crusty bunch. We work on all different levels. Teachers, nursery teachers, former police people, you know. It's not the depiction that you think, and always peaceful, non-violent.
Thank you. Daro, do you want to come in on that?
Can I just ask, how many people are in favour of extinction? Okay, you're all rebels. Well done.
Well put. Okay. Question from MW. There has been a lot of research into how beavers can help hugely with biodiversity and improve river health. Is Surrey considering how beavers could help? More notes to be taken, I think, over there.
Well, I mean, my day job is and has been for over 15 years animal health and welfare and conservation. So anything like this is right up my alley, and they've taken the notes. So I mean, yes,
you're going to be busy, aren't you?
We'll look at it. You know, we're doing a lot of stuff with waterways and things like that. So absolutely, we don't say no to any suggestions like this.
I think
I'd
that's the
love
nice
to
thing
see
about some
beavers
of
in
these
there.
ideas, you know,
Yeah.
it's best practice, you know, if somewhere
Exactly.
something works, to try and adopt it
Yeah.
elsewhere
And the
as
more
well.
of these species we can get into Surrey, the better. So absolutely, I'd be excited to work on something like that.
Very nice,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Some people believe that technology will save, okay, so technology in italicized, will save us from the climate emergency. Electric vehicle revolution, renewable energy, and the like. What are your views on that science and technology is going to come to the rescue? A shake of the head or not?
I think it's an extent, sorry, this one really interests me. It's an extent it will, but I think the majority comes from that massive shift in behaviour, and it comes down to things that were missing on COP26, like diet, food, all of those sorts of things, basically. I think that's as important as technology.
James, you're studying natural sciences at Cambridge. You're a scientist in the making. To what extent do you feel, in the end, science is going to save the day, rather than having, you know, because that's what people want, right? You know, they don't say, oh, I don't want to go back and living in caves. I want to still be able to go on holiday. I still want to be able to, you know, heat my home and do what I like. Maybe science can come up with a clever idea. Do you think that's going to be the answer?
I think there's definitely a huge role for science to play, and there's a need for investment in science technologies to develop over the coming decades. But especially for the huge change that was mentioned earlier, a reduction of 45% in emissions in the coming decade, in just less than 10 years now, it's going to need something else. It's going to need radical political action on a scale that we have not seen before. And that's something that the current government doesn't seem very willing to do. I think they're placing a lot of their hopes in both in emerging technologies, but also in nature-based solutions, which I love, by the way, I think are amazing, but we can't place such a reliance on them as the current government is. And I think that's it's partly a product of what's most acceptable to voters, as Tony mentioned. But we do need to go further, and we do need to start making more difficult decisions that are going to impact people's day-to-day lives. And I think that's something that we're going to have to think very hard about how we're going to communicate to the public. I think the media is the first step in changing that, but I don't know how we're going to do it.
Okay, well, I think both Heather and Daro want to...
Yeah.
No, you go.
I was going to say, I think we need to distinguish between difference between science and technology. For a start, science is a way of questioning the world, and is neutral. Technology is about applying that, and you know, I'm going to sound like a Luddite here. I think we need to be very, very wary of thinking technology will get us out of the mess that technology has got us into. So yes, I think we will need technologies. You know, making charcoal is actually a technology, but I think it's about being very, very cautious and not thinking that technology will sort this out. I suggest it's much more about behavioural change rather than technological development. We've got the technology. We know what we need to do. We just need to do it.
Heather.
Well, I'm on the side of the beavers and the bats and the dormice and the insects and the fish. Ecological restoration, I think, is absolutely primary. Absolutely primary. And I think it has to be bold, it has to be visionary, has to bring in big landowners. Surrey has some very large, you know, private landowners, has to bring in the farmers, and again, has to come, you know, working alongside, you know, communities, already organizations who are involved in it. You know, I just think we have to really start to come together. I think there has to be a real shared endeavor here. And there has to be, I think, a high level of pleasure principle in this too. I don't think people want to feel it's drudgery and hard work. I think it has to be elevated. And actually, even with Extinction Rebellion, I've had some of the most enlightening, heightened moments. I mean, really, seeing a pink yacht, you know, in Oxford Circus is a moment I'll never forget. But always done with huge grace, courtesy, love, and compassion.
Thank you.
And beavers.
Now, I know we started late, so I think we can overrun a little bit, but I probably want to wrap things up in about 3 minutes. So maybe time for one more question. And I'm not going to go by, let's see, you know, the popular vote, which has the highest. There's an interesting one here, and I'll leave the last word for you, Marisa. Will Surrey County Council change their transport policies to switch resources to build cycle paths, maintaining public right-of-way networks and subsidising public transport?
Yes, we're doing it. We're in the midst of it. We've got a new transport plan. We're rolling out what we call LC WIPs, which sound very exciting, local walking and cycling infrastructure plans. We've put money into electric buses. Farnham's our model town that we've done that in. We're looking at all of our rights of way and things, looking at how people can get places they need to get to quicker and faster without having to take a car. We're on it. We see it as absolutely the fundamental and most important piece of work we can do.
That's the most definitive answer. I'm going to break with tradition because there's someone with their hand up who wants to, I think, respond on that note.
Very old-fashioned way of asking coming back to Surrey County Council on your sustainability and drive. I attended a meeting at your new headquarters, the outskirts of Rye. Where the only way to get to it was by car.
Yep.
You moved from the centre of Kingston, which is probably a very sustainable location for staff.
Not really.
Public transport. So within Surrey County Council, how much was that sustainable decision or just purely property related?
Okay, if I can.
So are you able to answer
I
that?
am,
Just summarise the question in your answer,
Okay.
because I suspect that won't have been picked
So-
up on the mics for those.
So this
streaming.
gentleman was asking about our move from Surbiton, Kingston area to Reigate, where we've taken an office that's about a 15, if you walk as fast as I am, 10 minutes, but probably 15 to 20-minute walk from the train station. It's a very green property. So our old property in Surbiton was very old. It was a lovely building, but environmentally it was very unsound indeed, and there was no way of retrofitting it in order to get us into a place where we need to get, where we need to be in a building where we can use renewable energies, where we can insulate it properly, all of those sorts of things. Now, 2 points here. One, I take the approach of work from home where we can. I'm telling my team to work from home as much as they can so they can avoid travelling anywhere around this county apart from when they need to do so to visit countryside sites and that kind of thing. Secondly, we're looking at putting in some sort of transport system that gets people from the train station to that building. So car clubs, electric bike schemes, a bus on days when we know that we're all going in collectively and we'll fill that bus, all of that kind of thing. So yes, it was raised. We were very much aware of the distance from there. It's not as easy as for me to get to. I come from Virginia Water. I can hop on a train. To get to Reigate, I've got to go all the way into London and all the way back out to Reigate and then do that massive walk. So there are some issues with it, but on the whole, when we looked at the whole carbon footprint of moving, it was sounder to move to Reigate.
That was at the core of the decision to move there?
It was a huge part of the decision. No, it was a huge part of the decision. Plus the fact that being in Kingston and Surbiton isn't actually in Surrey. You know, I mean, that's a historic thing.
I guess we're sort of turning into political. It would have been nice to end with a rousing call to action on environmentalism, but thank you, Marisa, for addressing that point. I know there are lots of questions there, and we could probably go on for a long time. But I can see people already know what time we're supposed to be wrapping up. I'm sure there's Champions League football, and I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, that you all want to get back to. So I think I should draw it to a close and absolutely thank our panelists here in person, Marisa, Heather, Daro, and James. And of course, a big, huge thanks to Tony Juniper over in Cambridge for joining us and sticking with us for the debate. So please, another round of applause. And to round things off, it's my pleasure to now invite Heather Kerswell, who is chair of the Surrey Hills Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, who will close this year's debate with her sum up. Heather.
What a great evening. This evening is not about the Surrey Hills, although we would have had much to tell you if it were. It's about us facilitating a wider debate, and our speakers have really done us proud. But that debate will form the context for our own work, which goes right to the grassroots in Surrey, as many of you here know. Thank you, Jim. And thank you to all our fantastic speakers, panelists, and all our guests here at Surrey University and online for engaging in such an exceptional debate. It was so heartening to hear Professor Graham Miller, where's he disappeared to? There he is, talking about the university's work, its international leadership, and the practical action that you're taking on the campus. Although I do worry a bit about what the damage your borehole is doing to the deep aquifers, but I'm sure your scientists have it all under control. Our keynote speaker, Tony Juniper, really brought home to us the climate and ecological crisis that we're in, and our need to inspire action in an integrated fashion rather than piecemeal. Halt destruction in the natural world, he said, and start its recovery. The economy and society will be the casualty if we don't. And he referred to the Dasgupta review, which came out in February this year, and many of you will be familiar with it, which is perhaps the first time that the Treasury have started to talk about investment in the natural world. In the Surrey Hills, we're delighted to be supporting Tony and the Natural England team in taking forward work to enlarge the Surrey Hills AONB. Hooray, yes. And that will give us a greater opportunity to play our part in a wilder, healthier, greener, and low-carbon region. Then Jim introduced our panelists. Marisa outlined the very comprehensive and ambitious climate change action plan for Surrey and how we need to inspire our residents to do our bit by changing our behaviours. And then Heather Ackroyd, our Surrey Hills resident artist, took us to London Shore with that amazing installation and ceremony, Ben Ockrey's speech, wonderful, powerful speech about photosynthesis, which left me with that powerful message that the solution is ultimately about love, love for each other and love for the planet. And I'm reminded of Ian Foster saying, only connect. Can you hear the future weeping? What a phrase. And then Daro Montag continued the story of photosynthesis through his blend of science and art in how the dark dust from charcoaling can be locked back into the soils, and his message of do what you can. This afternoon's arts workshop showed me very clearly how powerful art is in spreading the message, remember nature. Finally, our young Surrey-born activist, environmental activist, James Miller, conveyed that sense of urgency with a wonderful passion and energy. I loved the climate clock. Again, he was referring to artistic themes. And it gave me, as a granny, that sense of optimism. Daro, this is why I'm optimistic. When I see the younger generation and their passion, their sense of urgency, and the feeling that it's the younger generation who can make the future brighter and greener. So thank you very much to all our speakers. I would also like to thank Graham's events and production team at Surrey University and our Surrey Hills team. I see them lurking at the back and some at the front for organising it. But mostly I would like to thank you for attending, whether it's in person or online, and for contributing to the debate. I thought the questions were absolutely fascinating. I'm going to answer one of them in a minute. I can't resist the temptation. And you can go on with your contribution as well. This innovative project to enlarge the Surrey Hills national landscape will be strongly based in real citizen engagement. It's going to be launched shortly, possibly as early as next week, and I urge you all to take part. It is designed for you to use as you walk in the hills at Christmas. You can stand in your muddy field, upload your favorite view to a special website. This will be doing what you can do over Christmas. Take part. Now, the Surrey Hills is a consortium, a family of arts, Surrey Hills Society, Gordon over there, and Surrey Hills Enterprises, all working together to tackle climate emergency at the most local level with parishes, businesses, citizens and farmers. So as we approach Christmas, I want to take this opportunity, this is the commercial, to encourage you to buy local and buy sustainable. And just to answer that question that came up about where can we find out about local produce and local farms, please go on the Surrey Hills Enterprises, Simon over there, website, and you will find a whole raft of local suppliers and people from whom you can buy either online or in person, all beautifully locally resourced. Our awesome Surrey Hills Enterprises businesses are passionate about environmental sustainability. That is why they sign up. They sign up to a pledge of environmental sustainability, or they're not allowed to join. And many have been awarded the Surrey Hills trademark, which is a mark of quality, sustainability, and local provenance. And if you go to West Horsley Place this weekend, you can find a great range of Surrey Hills gifts at the Artisan Festival. On a personal note, I should say that last year, we sent chimney fire coffee to all our friends who absolutely loved it. We will be sending you a link to a short survey to capture your feedback to inform our planning of next year's symposium. Now, a final point, you will see around this building, here are some orphan trees. They are looking for a kind home. If you feel able, please pick up a tree and take it home with you and plant it somewhere. That will be what you can do today. In fact, that can be what you do when you wake up first thing tomorrow morning. I'm going to leave you with a video featuring some of the projects from the AONB's wonderful Surrey Hills Arts Programme, which inspires everyone to care for nature and its beauty. Enjoy the video and have a happy Christmas. You heard it first here.
This lovely film, though it is, it's in a loop. So think of these as the closing credits. If people want to leave, don't feel as though it's rude. If you need to go, you can go now.
Harvest is a light installation. It's 65 skeleton bales that span over this field, which is 300 metres long. It comes to life from dusk and it's on till 10 o'clock. One of the traditions of Harvest is that when the final bales have been collected in, the community would come together. We've got Harvest singing at the top of the hill, and Alison Carlier has her artwork calling happening inside the field today. You know, it will be the last night that my bales will be lit. It will be very beautiful to have Alison doing her calling from the top and the bottom, because we've got a choir up there of 80 people, and I think Alison's got a choir of 40 down here, so it's going to be great.
We're echoing to people way up at the top of Box Hill, and then they will sing something and then stop, and then we're led on. We're full of enthusiasm, as Mary said, you're with the sort of rabble down in the field.
Yeah, we're going to shift a little way, just a little way, but not behind a tree.
That afternoon in the roughs, invited ancient trees to yield a word no one had spoken, stooped to peer down holes, under hedges, searching for stories yet to be told. Of the earth we gather them in. Now harvest comes on and the reaping's begun. The fruits of the earth we gather them in. And now let us wait till the seeds.
With the lanterns and the sunset and the light installation down in the field below, it was really quite special. It was really amazing to be able to hear the choir down below on the field below, like sing back to us, and you could hear them. It was really quite something. I didn't know whether we'd be able to, but it worked beautifully as well. Felt quite powerful actually.
To hear the choir down there after hearing the choir up here, it was slightly dreamy, and it was like a natural echo.
We actually finished singing, and then when we looked around, we had all these red hay bales, and it was just like we'd sort of brought them to life. And singing was great. Everybody joined in with great enthusiasm, and it was a lovely project to be part of.
The whole thing is fantastic at raising awareness of the landscape, of what's going on, and the fact that we're here in the Surrey Hills, so close to London, so close to everything else. It's really unique, it's fantastic, and it's well worthy of the celebration.